Thank you very much. I'll just share the slides. There we go. I think you can see the first slide now. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present the work today. What I'm going to be talking about is repeatable, reproducible, and open bioinformatics. And I should say that I'm a Rosalind Franklin Fellow and a Professor of Evolutionary Biology. And this work is part of a course that I teach. And it's a team exercise. I teach it with Per Polsbel, Jurjan van Zee, and Sebastian Lequy. And we're in the Groningen Institute for Evolutionary Life Sciences in the Faculty of Science and Engineering. And the aim of the course is to teach students who have no experience beforehand in bioinformatics, to give them skills, practical skills in bioinformatics, but also to make them aware about open research practices. So the open research objectives that we've focused on are teaching the students about repeatable and reproducible coding. And secondly, or you can have repeatable and reproducible coding, but you have to have an understandable structure to your bioinformatics project for it to be interpretable by other people. So we teach about how to structure your bioinformatics project, how to use version control so that you can check for errors and share the code with other people. And finally, to teach students about archiving code and their data and the importance of making that code and data citable. So why is it important to have repeatable and reproducible coding? I'll go through what we teach about this. Within psychology, there was a project led by Brian Nozak at the University of Virginia, where they formed a collaboration with many other researchers to try and replicate 1,000 studies that were published in 2008. And they found that only 36% of those psychology studies were replicated. And the following year, there was a survey in Nature where just over 1,500 scientists were surveyed to ask if they thought there was a reproducibility crisis. And you can see the colours in red here that 90% of scientists surveyed said yes, there was a reproducibility crisis. So why is this important and why should we care about it? One of the most extreme cases is in the detection of academic fraud. And this is just one example of a high-profile case by Jonathan Prout. It's an ongoing investigation through where he's based at the University, McMaster University. And Jonathan Prout is a researcher in behavioural ecology who works on spider personalities. And he's under investigation for data fabrication in about 160 academic papers. And at least 18 of those have been retracted already. And this can have very important consequences for especially younger researchers who've worked with him, who in some cases have had their entire publication record wiped out because of this. Obviously, this is not the only high-profile case. It's been compared to, for example, Diederik Stapel, who was at the University of Tilburg, who was suspended for misconduct due to data fabrication and was actually a professor earlier at the University of Groningen. So why do we see this academic fraud? It's probably linked to the phenomena of publish or perish in academia. So in academia, if you want to achieve and carry on in your career, you need to publish papers. And publishing papers then allows you to acquire grants to do more research. So there's very little incentive really to have repeatable and replicable research. So what we teach on the course is why should students care about open research? And one thing we say is that the first person that's going to actually have to repeat the research is the student themselves. because they're going to have to, at some point, they may have to go through their data again to add new data. They might have a break and come back to it and have to rerun analyses. When they submit their work for publication, reviewers might request changes and they have to implement those changes. And repeatability is also very important for detecting errors. So repeatability there is in terms of for the researchers themselves to be able to repeat the analyses. But as the strip comic shows, it's also important for other people to be able to reproduce your research. So this, for example, is important for collaborators who you want to share your data and code with so that they can run your analyses, and reviewers and editors can check your code, and you might want to hand over the project going forward. So having repeatable and reproducible coding really reduces your workload in the long run. So teaching about open science is important because it means that we have to teach that data sets and code are publicly available in digital format with minimal or no restrictions. And it's important because this then enables the repeatability and reproducibility. And as I said, it allows for peer review and collaboration, error detection, and for the data to be reused, for example, importantly for the progress of science in meta-analyses. And it also improves the credibility of yourself as a scientist. So the second part that we teach about is structuring your bioinformatics project so that you have a consistent structure that can be easily interpreted by other people looking at your code and data. The most important thing here is for the students to be organised. So they should be careful when they're coding and think about the code that they're writing, and always make sure the code is very well annotated. So if you come back to it a year in the future, you'll be able to look at your code and know exactly what you're doing, but importantly, other people can look at it and understand what the code does. There are simple techniques you can use for organizing, so having your directories in capitals and your scripts and files in lowercase, which means that when you're working on a command line, it's very easy to see what the directory scripts and files are. And including a README file in each directory to tell exactly what the code in that directory should be doing. So what we teach is to have a consistent project structure where you have the main project name directory with a README file in it. And then within that, you have different steps. So you have a subdirectory for step 1. And within that, you have further subdirectories where you store your data, your code, and your results. And in the step 1 directory, you have your main scripts and a README file. And it's very important to have these different directories to make sure that you're never overwriting your code and you're making your code generate results, which goes to a new subdirectory. And then within the project, you then have different steps. So you have step 1, step 2, and step 3, and all these different steps have got a similar structure, which makes them easily interpretable. And a really important thing is, which is often underappreciated, is that file names need to be interpretable. And this is another good comment here about how you should never really use something like the word final, because you're probably always going to alter that document, and that document then in the long term, the name becomes uninterpretable. So what we mean is that the file name should be human readable, that it's informative, and it needs to be machine readable. So you don't have things, for example, spaces can be a problem, and punctuation and accents. So that's the first 2 parts of the open research objectives. The third one is teaching students about version control. And we do this through teaching them how to use some software called Git. And Git software can then interact with GitHub, which is an open access platform where you can store your code and make that open access. So why is version control important? Well, it allows students to track their changes, and this can save students a lot of time, because if they make an error, they can go back to a previous version, see what changes they've made and where that error lies. It allows them to streamline their workspace, and it also provides a backup, because sometimes students are using cloud servers that might have a very limited time frame. And in terms of open research, it allows the students to share their work with their supervisors and collaborators. And when you make it open access, it means you can also get feedback on that code from other people. And fourthly, the last objective is to teach students about archiving code and data and making it citable. So a platform like GitHub is not a permanent resource. Because you have this version control option, it can be changing all the time, and therefore it's not always acceptable by journals. And therefore we teach students about the different options that are out there, particularly Dataverse NL, which allows you to archive your code and data, but other platforms such as Dryad, Figshare and Open Science Foundation. And the use of Zenodo, where you can create a DOI which makes your data citable. So this is giving students hand-on practice of making a bioinformatics project, structuring it, writing some code, and then using some platforms to make that code open access. And this is important because in the long term, it's going to really improve progress in science. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk to us about today, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Hannah, for this very interesting presentation. I think there is a lot to learn for all of us, especially structuring your data or your work and keeping logging everything. Everybody should and could do that in all disciplines, I guess. So thank you very much for that. We save questions for at the end, after all speakers have had their presentation, if there is still time. So now I would like to give the floor to our next award winner. That is Professor Anton Koster. He sent in a submission with his team. It is about SIMsalabim, an open source drift-diffusion simulator for semiconductor devices. Jan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Margaret. Yeah, so I'm still digesting what we just saw in Hannah's talk. I thought that was extremely interesting, and there was quite a few things that she touched upon that I completely recognize from our own work, and especially where we need improving. So I'm here to present about SIMsalabim. This is a project so I submitted this on behalf of Martin Koopmans, one of the PhD students, and myself. We both work in the Zernike Institute for Advanced Materials in the Faculty of Science and Engineering. So we're physicists basically working on, for example, solar cells. Yeah, so that is why we have the background image on this slide. Yeah, so we do a lot of research into new solar cells, new LEDs, new applications of semiconductors. Yeah, so what we're looking at here is not an example of what we do, because of course this is a well-established technology by now. But I think it's by now it's quite well recognized that this type of research is actually of some importance. So I just have a few slides, yeah, because I don't want to go into any of the details of the physics that we simulate or any of the simulation stuff. I just want to share a couple of experiences about why we made our main software open source. We put this on GitHub. The project is called SIMsalabim. It is actually a code database that you can compile in different flavors that gives you different functionality. And it's something that we've been developing for almost 20 years now. So basically, I started the whole thing when I was doing my PhD. Yeah, I started my PhD back in 2002. And over these almost 2 decades, we've used it in more than 50 publications. So it's been racking up quite a few citations or the publications based on this. So that's nice. At first, I was always very much protective, and I didn't want to share the code with anybody. I wouldn't even share compiled versions of the code, because to me that was always like building an experimental setup. Yeah, so we do quite a bit of experimental work as well, and then basically giving it to everybody else. Yeah, whereas you spend quite a few. Well, I basically spent most of my PhD on writing the first version of the code. Yeah, so that is something, and then you give a competitive advantage to others. Yeah, so to me, it for a long time it was not obvious how we could capitalize on sharing our code. Yeah, so of course this needs to be recognized in some form or another. That in my field is very much about, oh yeah, if you have many publications that are highly cited, then that's great. Yeah, so it's not so obvious how they could be beneficial. However, I noticed that at some point this has been shifting a little bit in my field. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I was contacted by a colleague in the US. He was making his code open source, and he simply sent an email to many people he thought that might be interested in using the code. And then it got me thinking, it's like, oh wow, isn't that great? Yeah, so of course I still cite his papers to say, look, we've been using this type of code. It sits over there, so we give credit to the people who first set up the code. But of course, you massively expand the user base of such a piece of software. And yeah, so that got us thinking. It's like, okay, we could be doing the same thing. Yeah, and there we are. So over the past 2 years or so, we spent quite a bit of time on making this happen. We even got a logo design, so there's the thing that sits at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, I thought like a project like this that sort of deserves a logo, just to show that we're serious about maintaining this software as well, so others can use it. This is Team SIMsalabim. So at some point, so that's me in the middle, sort of, with on the left Tejas Shirka, got his PhD a few years ago. And then beside me are Vincent Lacour and Martin Koopmans. Martin is about to finish his PhD, and the other two have graduated fairly recently. And it's basically these PhD students and myself who developed the code. And I like this a lot because we all love this particular project and using it. And we're all very enthusiastic about this. And at some point, Vincent showed up to the office with an old-fashioned Polaroid camera, and it's like, oh yeah, let's take a picture of Team SIMsalabim. So I just wanted to give credit to these people. So why did we decide to make this open source? Sorry, I think I forgot to mention what we actually use it for. I don't want to delve into the physics, but in semiconductor industry, it's quite common to, before you make a new semiconductor device, yeah, so a thing like a transistor, for example, the stuff that makes up your smartphone or your PC, you don't make it. No, you simulate to see whether it has the characteristics that you would like to have. Yeah, so semiconductor simulation is actually a very well established tool to understand applications. Yeah, things like a solar cell. We can use it for other solar cells, but we do quite a bit of solar cell research. Now, the thing is that there's quite a few new types of solar cells that academics like myself research quite intensively, and yeah, it's actually quite a big field. And with a new type of device or new type of solar cell or other semiconductor application, typically it's not so clear what is limiting the performance of such a device. Yeah, so to further understand, like, okay, what is going on, you can do a whole bunch of measurements, of course, and that's great. But you can typically understand these measurements much better if you also have the software to understand and to quantify the type of thing that you're looking at. So that is basically what our software does. And there are 3 reasons for us to make this open source. One is fairly obvious, to have more users of the code. Yeah, so now I'm happy to share the code. Actually, the link to the code is in my email signature. So everybody I send an email to actually gets the link. They may probably not interested, but they might be. So that's one thing. But you could also achieve this if you simply make it freeware. Yeah, so you compile the code, you can give it for free, give it away for free, but you don't share the actual code, so people cannot see what is being calculated. And to me, that second step, to make it open source, so codes like this exist in my field, freeware codes, but the open source aspect to me is critical, because that enables transparency. You can, if you're not sure what is being calculated, you can look it up in the code, and you can you can see exactly what is going on. And that's important because if you write a publication based on such a piece of software, you need to be sure that you understand what the model is doing and that it is actually applicable to your specific case. Yeah, so the transparency aspect to me is the most important thing. Is like people can trust, or if they don't trust what we're doing, they can actually look it up and critically assess whether what we do makes any sense. And of course, ideally, it would be great if we have more people contributing to the code. Yeah, and of course, this also requires a little bit of infrastructure to at least document how people can contribute. A little bit about notation and naming of files, also like Hannah presented. Yeah, these are issues that we only recently started thinking about. So we're still very much in the process of trying to understand how to do this. So this is my last slide. I just want to reflect a little bit about our journey. Yeah, so I think we started this 2 or 3 years ago, and then I figured, oh, let's make it open source. And then at some point I realized, look, I made this as an employee of the University of Groningen. So am I even allowed to share this? It is not my property, yeah, not me and Anton Koster privately. Of course, it is owned by the University of Groningen. So I got in touch with the legal department, ABZ, to talk about licensing and how this works and et cetera, et cetera. And actually, this was a complicated step. It's important to get it right, to pick the right type of license that is sort of suitable for the project, that it enables others to use it. But there's quite a few things there that have to be considered. Yeah, and the legal issues that have to be sorted out. I think that's important. The legal department even told me, maybe I misunderstood, but the legal department even told me that if you just put it out there on the internet, that it is still actually copyrighted because, and it's not open source because it is still mine. Yeah, so this is important. And then we did a massive time investment in making the course open source, because then all of a sudden you think, you critically reassess like, oh yeah, maybe we have to clean up the code a little bit. It was always well annotated, but not so well documented. Yeah, so I wrote a reference manual. It's about 40 pages PDF. It's on there on the GitHub site. Spent quite a bit of time to very nicely document what the model does exactly. Yeah, so you don't have to look into the code. You can also just look in the manual. It's like, okay, so what is happening? What do the different parameters do, etc.? What output is it generating? And this is something that, of course, I always wanted to do, but never really took the time. And now, in trying to persuade others to use it, I really felt like, okay, but now we have to do a clean up the code, write a better reference manual. I recorded one of the first of what is hopefully a series of instructional videos, just to persuade people that it's not so difficult to use. Yeah, so it's just me. You see my desktop, you see me in a little camera, and then typing away. Look, this is how it works. Oh, it's easy. There you go. And just to persuade people to use it. So what is next is so now the code is ready. We submitted the software itself and its description to the Journal of Open Source Software, yeah, which is a peer-reviewed journal. It's very different from normal physics journals in the sense that the reviewing process is very different. And there, what is assessed is really the documentation of the software. Does it compile? How's the structure? Is the naming okay? Yeah, so not so much focused on the physics, but really on the software aspect of this, which is quite an interesting experience. Now, for us next is to increase the visibility in the user base. Yeah, so to really, like, indeed, as that person did many years ago, that I just relayed this anecdote, send out emails to others like, look, I have this great piece of software. I see that you're trying to do simulations in your recent publications. Yeah, we have something that can do probably everything you want to do, and it's free. It's open source. It's transparent. You can use it. You can extend it. You can see exactly what is happening. But this will be the next phase of the project. Okay, so this is all I wanted to share, really. Thanks for your attention. Thanks for the award, very much appreciated. Also on behalf of Martin. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, Jan, thank you very much for your interesting talk, where you walked us through your whole process from reluctancy to outright advocacy and all the difficulties that you encountered and how you settled that. And importantly, we are also very pleased to proudly see the certificate in the background of you, the Open Research Award certificate that the others received as well. So other people can see it as well now, so very nice. We have to quickly go to the next speaker, that is a PhD student, Andres Padilla, and his topic is about astronomical databases and open practices to understand galaxies. So the floor is yours, Andres.
Oh, hi, thanks, Maurice. I think I need the permission to share my screen.
Oh, you don't have it yet, so we make you moderator. You should have permission now.
Yes, so let me wait for me 5 seconds. So I hope you are seeing my screen.
Yes,
right?
we do.
Perfect. Yeah, so as Maurice mentioned, today I'm just going to talk about astronomical databases and open practice to understand galaxies. So let me start from the last part, galaxies. So most of you are coming from humanities, so this is just a very brief, short introduction. So what are galaxies? Well, galaxies are those important astronomical objects that fill the universe. And right now, the formation and evolution of these galaxies is one of the main topics in research in astronomy. And one of the ways to actually do this research is by classifying galaxies. So this is one of the ways that we do it. And we do it in one of those types. And those types are called active galactic nuclei. And those are galaxies where their center, so the inner core, has a very strong radiation that comes from the very massive black hole that has around a dusty torus or even has a jet in some cases. So we planned of our idea of understanding galaxies, we try to focus more into this classification type of these galaxies that depends mainly on the line of sight. What I mean is that depending on the viewing angle from the Earth to the galaxy, we are going to have different types of classification. So in other words, for example, like the galaxies that we focus on are these kind of galaxies that when you look from the face on, I mean, when you look directly to the black hole of the galaxy, these galaxies are going to be classified as Cipher 1 galaxies, while you look at to the H-on view, these galaxies are going to be classified as Cipher 2. And there are also different types between 1 and 2. So what we want to do is to use this information of the classified galaxies that comes from the astronomical databases. So astronomical databases contain different kind of images, tabular data, and even some theoretical estimations, and from very huge amounts of different astronomical objects. And it's still even more objects to come with the next generation of space telescopes and even ground-based telescopes. So one of these astronomical databases that we use is the CDS. That's the Strasbourg Astronomical Data Center that can help us to identify our objects, and it also have tools for arranging the catalogs and at the same time interact with data. And the second one is the NET. That's the NASA EPAC Extragalactic Database that allows us to look for these galaxies, and at the same time, it already have some information about physical quantities that they have and even detailed references of the same. But these two astronomical databases depend mainly on people. What I mean with people, I mean that documentalists are the ones that maintain the information in a correct order, but also there are researchers that add their input, their information, their research into these databases. So because of this, databases can have some incorrect data, or the data can be very heterogeneous. Data can be also incompatible, or even there could be data that is missing. So taking that into account in terms of the astronomical databases, what we do is that we focus our research in terms of open science as a motivation. Why is that? Because we want to explore the data in these astronomical databases to, in a way, improve the homogeneity of the same, and at the same time make the data of our research available not only for researchers, astronomers, but also for amateur astronomers like normal people that really like astronomy. And the second one is that everyone is able to reproduce our research and also show the transparent practice that we could do with this kind of information from the databases. And finally, as we saw before with Natalie, try to show the data in a fair way. So findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So from the databases, what we get is generally the classification types. I mean, how these galaxies are classified, and some of the information from that. But we also get some images, so pictures, photos of these galaxies. And these photos of the galaxies are also called for broadband photometry in astronomy, because they change depending on the wavelength that you are looking at. So for example, if you're looking at red, the galaxy is going to look very different than if you look at blue. And that's not only for the optical part, but we also have infrared, ultraviolet, and in some cases, X-ray, radio, and other wavelengths. So that information from these pictures, we also can get it from the databases. And what we do is to use this data and model it through a spectral energy distribution that takes into account different components, the stellar component, dust component, the agent components, and we create a model. So for the galaxies that we want to analyze, we create a model, and that's when things get a little bit complicated, because we are estimating billions of models for the galaxies, and we need to use and reproduce this data in a good way. So that's why we use the high performance computing cluster in the RUG, so the Peregrine, that can help us to use this information of creating almost 2 billion models for the 13,000 galaxies that we are analyzing. And with this, we are actually generating a large quantity of physical parameters, or in other words, data. And not all that data, we are using it for our research. So this large quantity of data, what we do is just we make it public, we make it open. And we use one of the tools that we already mentioned before, that is Zenodo. That Zenodo can help us to store this kind of large data sets, unfortunately up to 50 gigabytes. So you just have to select what is actually important for other users. And it allows us also to have a permanent identifier, or the DOIT, for this data set. So other people can use the information and work with it in the way that they want. But what happened with the rest of the data? Not just the data that we are creating in the cluster, but in the whole research. Well, for that, we use GitHub. We organize all our research in a way that it can be reproduced in different steps, where data and code are available, and we can control like the different steps of what we are doing. And thanks to GitHub, yeah, as we already mentioned, there is a version control system that can have different advantages, but the ones that are, I think, are most important is that you can collaborate with others, and at the same time, you can check if there is an error or mistakes that you want to go back to those scripts and look what happened. So with this GitHub, I don't know if you see it, but there is also a small button here that you can habilitate in your repository and allows you to launch another platform that is called Binder that connects with a Jupyter Hub. And this has the ability of reproduce the code in a Jupyter environment online. So only after, if I remember correctly, 5 to 10 minutes, when you click this link, you will have the complete environment, the same environment where we do our research. You can just follow the steps and rerun the whole process. And this is very important because, in a way, other researchers can verify and experiment all the steps that we have inside the repository. And that's not all, because we also publish our research as a preprint in arXiv. And arXiv is one of the most popular repositories for preprints in astronomy and physics. And over there, well, people can just check and our research before it's even published. So we can have some feedback on our way of trying to do these things. And just as a minor point, I can tell you that in our research, we learned that this kind of viewing angle that we were looking at for the different types of AGN galaxies was not the most important factor to classify this kind of galaxies. So I just want to finish with the conclusion that we have made use of publicly available data from astronomical databases, and we have used different tools from Zenodo, GitHub, Binder, and arXiv, and all of those together help us to make science transparent and reproducible. Or in other words, I would like to say that open research practice are the best way to do science. And I think that's it from my side. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much,